Say we are recording. Saying that right there.
This is your screen sharing. You gotta hit pause.
Okay. All right, we're live. Hopefully, hopefully I'm not muted.
Hello, Tim's mom.
Hi, Serena.
Hi, Tim's mom.
So hopefully she gets that. Jeff usually also posts this online. So if you want to hear what you sound like, then by all means,
No.
he'll post that on the Anchor channel. Let me just start with who has gone through a study of Isaiah, either through a preaching series at a church or through a study that maybe you've done in a small group or even in a lecture series. Who's actually gone through? All right, so Cass has. And what you're only asking questions?
No, don't ask.
Don't ask questions.
Yeah, don't
Okay.
ask questions.
No one else?
Well, I have it.
You have,
Yes, but don't ask questions.
but don't ask questions. Okay, well, that is my style, is I ask questions because I don't know the answers either. But one of the things that really intrigues me about scripture is the connections. And Isaiah is one of those books that really is a connection from the Old Testament to the New Testament. And as we go through this introduction here in a minute, I think you'll begin to see, wait a minute, what Isaiah is saying, I remember that from Romans, or I remember that from Corinthians, or I remember that from Revelation, or I remember that from the Gospels, or I remember Jesus saying this. And that's exactly true. Because, well, I'll get to that. Isaiah is quoted all over the New Testament. And so you'll see familiar terms, phrases, expressions, images, metaphors that you are familiar with from your New Testament reading, but you'll see it all through Isaiah. So that's how important he is into the grand scheme of things. All right, let's get started. Why Isaiah? Well, Isaiah is important. And he was important not just for his day as a prophet, but he's important for us as well. When the Jews were exiled into Babylon, Isaiah was important. When they returned to Jerusalem, Isaiah was important. And even in modern Judaism, Isaiah is important because he's often quoted in festivals and holidays and events. And the same for Christendom. Every gospel quotes him. Jesus quotes him. Many of the epistles quote him. And John uses a lot of the same imagery in Revelation. So it is throughout the New Testament as well. It is throughout Judaism as well. And I think if we understand what Isaiah was saying, that bridge between the Old Testament and the New Testament, I think it will really deepen our understanding of what Jesus did, what that's all about. So I think it's important for us to study this. And I'm glad you're joining in this study. What I hope is that as we read together, you will share the insights that you have, because I don't know it all. And I think I'm only scratching it a little bit. But hopefully through our shared time together, we come to understand this. The other thing about this is Isaiah itself, the book is beautiful. If you notice in your agenda, the page that looks like this, like an old chart, this is our schedule for the year. It's pretty aggressive. If you look at the last three, threads, weaving, and tapestry. And one of the things I found as I read through Isaiah is that these same images or same metaphors or these same sayings repeat. And I'm kind of doing it in order of the book for the first part of this. But what I'm going to do in that last section is take some of these and just weave them through the book. And we will point those out as we go. There's 4 or 5 that I'm probably going to focus on. And they're real familiar. It's not like I've never heard these before, because you've heard them in the New Testament. But it's those same images from Isaiah that are woven through. That's the most exciting section that I'm going to do. More on that in a minute. Isaiah is big. It's 66 chapters. It's the third longest book in the Bible. Psalms is larger, and Jeremiah is larger. So it's a big undertaking to do. But it's big not just because of its length. It's big because it tells the story of man's failure and God's redemption, which is I hear the same old story. Can't think of the second verse. Da, 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 in glory.
Victory.
Victory in Jesus.
We're singing it today, but I don't remember it. But it is that same old story. But it's interesting to hear it through Old Testament, through an Old Testament understanding, and that's what we're going to do here. I mentioned that it's quoted. 54 of the chapters in Isaiah, 54 of the 66 are quoted in the New Testament. And that doesn't include the allusions, the imagery, the metaphors that are also used that aren't a direct quote. Your favorite put on the full armor of God from Ephesians 6?
Mhm.
We'll find a couple places in Isaiah where that same imagery is used of putting on armor to fight a spiritual battle. And it's like, Paul wasn't as original as I thought. He stole that from Isaiah. Yeah. And it's really influential in all we know about Christendom. When Paul translates the theology of the Old Testament into New Testament terms for the Gentiles, he takes what God revealed to the Jews in the Old Testament and translates that for the Gentiles, for us. And so we'll see a lot of Isaiah in both Romans and 1st and 2nd Corinthians. The Gospels are full of images that come from, or quotes that come from Isaiah and Revelation as well. And then the themes that are addressed in Isaiah are everywhere in the New Testament. Like I said, 54 of the 66 chapters. So Isaiah was very well known in that first century. And the gospel writers, the epistle writers, they drew on that knowledge that they had of the Old Testament and to present that to us today. As I was reading through the commentaries and preparing this, one of the things they said over and over again was that you really miss some of the beauty of Isaiah because it's in Hebrew. If you could read it in Hebrew and understood Hebrew, like a professor of Hebrew language, you would pick up on all these little nuances that we just miss out. And I came up with a little example to help us understand that. Right. So Isaiah has sarcasm. Not that there's any here. Isaiah has cynicism. Isaiah uses images sometimes to paint a ridiculous picture. And that's sort of what this sentence is. Now, imagine that you found this on a scroll 1,000 years later. And you don't really know how Hebrew is spoken. So you don't get the homonym between board and board, right? Or the play on words that's there.
Mm.
And we haven't had internal combustion engines, for 1,000 years. So I don't know what backfired means. The ignition happens in the exhaust system, backfire. But I'm going to do my best to translate it with what I know of this language. And I would translate it something like this. My wife wanted to be heard. And as she was speaking, I showed no interest. And she got angry with me.
Mm.
It's a true translation of what the original intent was. But I've missed the play.
Yeah.
I've missed the humor. I've missed the little idiom there of the backfired that I don't understand. I can translate Isaiah into English from Hebrew. But people have. I haven't done that. But I'm missing some of these nuances. So as we go along, I'm going to point out a few of those. And probably in the notes in the bottom of your Bible, you will see a few more. So if you see one and I don't mention it, just pull it up and we'll see, oh, this is how the Hebrew goes. This is how the Hebrew. So we'll pick up a couple of those little nuances along the way. I'm no Hebrew scholar, so I can only point out what someone else has written down there. All right. Who was Isaiah? Well, he was certainly learned, probably related, but certainly involved in the kings, the royals. And as we'll find out, Isaiah also served in the office of prophet. That's sort of a new concept for me that I picked up on one of the things that I read. And this is one of those things about God, about who he chooses to fulfill his will. And I think because Isaiah's command of language is such, his imagery is such, I think maybe here's the guy I want to write this bridge between the old understanding and the new understanding. I want somebody who's creative in his words. Isaiah doesn't dictate what God says, but he hears what God says. He sees what God says. He understands what God's trying to, and he writes in his own voice. And I think that's maybe why Isaiah was chosen for that. But think of the other people in the Bible that we talk about. Why was Moses chosen to be the spokesperson for the people? Well, I don't think a bricklayer would have gone in the presence of Pharaoh. He never would have gotten in the door. But Moses was raised in the Egyptian household. He understood all the Egyptian culture because he was raised in that way. And God used that ability of him as an Egyptian to be the spokesperson for the Hebrews. Think of David. Why was David chosen as king? What's the reason? What's the common reason? Because David was a shepherd. Well, yes, a great image for what Jesus does.
Mhm.
But what do they say about David?
He loved the Lord.
He did love the Lord.
Mhm.
So as a leader, you want that. What else?
God was with him. God looked at his heart.
Yeah, he has the same heart of God. He has a heart like God, a heart after my own heart. And then, and so you have a person like that God recognizes. Here's a man that has a heart after my own, and he has the creative capacity to express that. You read through the Psalms, and it's pain, and it's anguish, and it's sorrow, and it's suffering, and joy, and praise, and all through that. And yet, here's somebody who can translate those emotions for us, the ones that we all have because of the events in our lives, into how does that help us relate to God? How do we understand that I can go to God with my deepest, deepest sorrow, and God meets me right there, and I can finish that psalm with praise. Psalm 22 is one example. And then there's Paul. Paul's a man of letters. He understood everything about the Old Testament. He was a Pharisee. He understood the law forwards, backwards, sideways. He was zealous for the law. He was zealous for the Hebrew people. And yet, what did God choose him to do? Was he the minister to the Jews? No, he was the minister to the others, to the Gentiles. And why? Because Paul could translate that theology of the Old Testament and put it in terms of a universal theology. And he does that beautifully in Romans, which might be a study next year if I have time. And then the fourth person I might mention is you. How has God given you training, expertise, sympathies, a soft heart, a willing spirit, a kind word? How is he using you to fulfill what he wants you to do in the kingdom? And I just think that's one of the beauties of how God uses people to accomplish his will. And the ones we mentioned, and of course, each of us as well. When did he write? He wrote mostly between, or the timeline that's given is between 742 and 700 BC. So a 42-year period of preaching. And we'll figure out exactly where that fits in a timeline here in a minute, which I've conveniently given you a colored timeline. But that's the time that he wrote. Where did he live? Well, he lived in Jerusalem. And one of the things to look for as we read is how Isaiah will use the city, Jerusalem. as really a personification of our spiritual condition. They'll use words like Jerusalem or Zion or Mount Zion or the holy city, and it reflects the old state and it translates it to a new state. That's one of the big themes in Isaiah, this old to new. And we see that, of course, John uses that exact same imagery in Revelation. What happens at the end of Revelation? We have a new heavens and a new earth and a new holy city, a new Jerusalem, a new spiritual reality that happens because we are in Christ. And that's also a New Testament concept. 2 Corinthians 5:17. Therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a
New creature.
new creature. And what's gone away?
The old.
Old things.
Mhm.
Old things are passed away, and behold, all things become new. God doesn't just wash us. He recreates us. We become new. When we go to baptism, baptism isn't a cleansing of the dirt. It is a recreation. What do they say? You participate with Christ because you die, you're buried under the water, and then you're raised up. And you're raised up how? Not clean, new. And that's going to be a key theme as we go through this study. Who did he write for? Well, he wrote for the southern kingdom, and we'll get to that here in a minute. So it's Judah's kings. Judah is the southern kingdom, the nickname for the southern kingdom. Its leadership, but he also writes for the nations that are surrounding, and he also writes, especially in the second half of the book, for those that are going to return from exile, return from Babylon to reestablish the nation. And because there's so much New Testament theology, imagery that's wrapped up, he's also writing to us. And that's why I think it's important that we study Isaiah. He's not just writing the 2,000-year-old kings. He's writing to you and me. And what I hope we get out of this is I hear what God's saying to me now, about the reality that I have. How was he received? Well, he was listened to, but it's kind of like our kids, they listen to us, but they tend to go their own way. And that's pretty much what happened. What's interesting is Isaiah is the period before the Babylonian exile. I'll get to the history of that, but if you look at your timeline, you'll see Isaiah here about in the middle, right? Well, the captivity doesn't happen until 100 and so years later. But he's writing for those people who are in exile, chapter 40, we'll get there. And he's also writing to the people as they return, and things aren't quite what they expect. So he's writing in a very future-looking way. And what happens as he is re-examined, as the prophet Isaiah is re-examined after the exile, this whole idea of Messiah, the Messiah raises up. And that's why when Jesus comes, there are people looking for the Messiah. Now they don't see it the way Jesus comes as servant in the manger. They want that mighty king, that mighty warrior that will restore Israel to her former glory. But he was important in that intertestamental period. All right, here's our plan. How are we going to tackle this book? Well, it's a big one. And what I thought I would do is do it in sections. So if you look at your little agenda sheet, it looks like this. There's a line there between the two, and there's a reason for that. We'll get to that here in a second. But I'm kind of doing it in sections and kind of listing sort of the chapters that are going to be covered in that section. And obviously, if you get down to like the Tale of Two Judgments, that's a whole lot of chapters. You think we're going to read every verse there? No. I'll hit some highlights there. But some of these are just a single chapter, and some of them are even smaller. They're just a piece of one chapter. The praise piece is 3 sections out of 3 different chapters. But that's how I just chose to divide it. And basically that was for me to try to get a bite-sized piece. Here's a piece that I can work on together. I have to organize it in some way, or else I can't keep track of it. We won't read every verse, and we won't read it sequentially. We just won't. Sometimes we will, but a lot of times it's structured. The way Isaiah is structured is not linear, like we think. You know, you pick up a biography of a famous person. He was born in a log cabin, and he rose to be an attorney, and let me know, you know the person. You know, he lost an election. He had these debates, and he became president. Then he did the Emancipation Proclamation, and then he was assassinated. We think in terms of that, in that linear way, of time sequenced way, and the Jewish culture doesn't do that. It doesn't always. It isn't always arranged that way. The way Isaiah is laid out is not even sequential. There are things that are happened before that are later in the book than things that are in the front of the book. And as we will kind of see as we get into this, I'm sort of organizing it by how it's presented in order, but it's not order in time. Is the point that I'm trying to make.
I'm glad you said that, because there's times where I have read the Old Testament and I have read Isaiah, never studied it. I read it more than once. I got confused on it because it seemed backwards.
Back and forwards. Yeah, that's exactly that. And it's because it's just not how it's arranged. I think I have one more. Yeah, how long will we spend on Isaiah? Well, that's the second half of this. Most of these sections are a week. Some of them are 2, some of them are 3. I think it really depends on you. I am not going to try to cut off a particular section at the end of a class. If we go over, we go over. If we run short, we run short. I'm not going to try to dictate to the hour that we have. But this is sort of what I think will happen. You'll note on the schedule, I'm scheduling 3 weeks off for Thanksgiving, Christmas, and spring break. That's, you know, like a school year, right? But anyway, that's sort of our tentative outline. And we'll see how we go. But here's one thing I am convinced of, that Isaiah is this bridge. And I got to thinking, well, if I only had, let's say I didn't have the whole Bible, but I only had sections, or I only had books, which ones would I choose? Which one would give me the best hope of understanding who God is? And I can't not have Genesis, because Genesis tells us who God is and why we're created, and what God desires with us, why we were created. He wants to walk in the cool of the evening with us. That's what his desire is. He wants that relationship with us. So I can't get rid of Genesis. And I can't get rid of the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God and was God. I can't get rid of that. That explains who Jesus is and what Jesus did in coming to earth as God, as a human being, a little lower than the angels, as Jeff says. I love the way he keeps up with us. But I can't get rid of John. And then you can't understand the Jewish people without reading Exodus. You just can't. You can't understand their deliverance from slavery. You can't understand the covenant at Sinai. You can't understand their importance as God's chosen people unless you have Exodus. And I don't think you can get rid of Romans, because Paul lays out the theology of our deliverance from sin and death. And he lays out the covenant, the new covenant that we have in Christ. You can't get rid of that, or you don't understand it. And I think Isaiah is the 5th one. You can't understand these stories in the Old and these stories in the New unless you have this bridge that kind of connects them. And that's why I think this is a really worthwhile study, and one I'm pretty excited to do. And I hope to convey that as we go forward, that Isaiah has that importance. The one thing I will tell you, though, that Jesus is everywhere in Isaiah, and that's sort of the title of the study, Finding Jesus in Isaiah. It's not a hard find. He is everywhere. What Jesus' purpose was, how he did it, why he did it, what he had to do, what he had to do that others couldn't do. All of that's in Isaiah. It's critical that we understand that this so clearly points to Jesus to come, that it really becomes the bridge between the two. Okay. How are we doing on time? Oh, we're running out of time. Not that I'm worried about time. So Jeff has said this in sermons, I don't know how many times, but the Bible has many books written by many authors over 3,000 years, and it tells one story. When you read the Old Testament and you read the New Testament, do you think they're different stories or the same? Be honest.
Same.
You think
There's
they're
a lot
the
of
same?
same in, like, the New Testament would be the same, but with current.
It's a new
Time.
covenant and an old covenant.
You think they're identical
It's an
covenant?
old covenant and it's a new covenant, so that part's not the same.
How about,
But
how
they
about,
tag on to the old into the new.
But the people constantly in
Do
the old and the new
same stuff.
don't get it.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah, that's. the
that is
same.
constant.
That's the same. And
That
it's
is
still
the
that
same.
way.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'm gonna challenge you with something here in a second. Why not now? In one sentence or phrase, let's just try to work it out together. What is the Old Testament story about? And just a word or a phrase or a sentence.
History.
Also, some history, definitely history. History of
The Jewish people.
the Jewish
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's one aspect of the Old Testament. You don't have the history of the Jewish people in the New Testament. That's something that's different there. Okay, what else? What happens to the Jewish people?
They sin, they sin, they sin, and they need atonement.
Okay.
But they're atoning by animal sacrifice.
Right.
Yeah, right.
They have a whole sacrificial system to overcome their nature
Which is temporary,
And-
because they have to keep doing
Yeah.
it.
over and over
They
again.
keep
And they're-
going back to God.
Yeah,
They keep going back.
Going back.
Once they realize that they're they're in a mess, then they go back.
okay,
And their whole being is the hope of a Messiah and all the prophecy that was written.
right.
They're
They're
hoping
always
that's
pointing
it.
forward.
Yeah.
Always
They always
forward.
take God for granted.
Yeah, there you go.
They always take him for granted and then they turn on him. They
Right.
forget about him and they turn on
Right.
him.
Boy, that
Sound
sounds a
like
lot like my
David.
life, don't
Yeah,
it?
and until it really hit the fan and all of a sudden one day they said, whoops, maybe
Yeah.
we need him again.
Yeah.
Famous
And the
Right.
whole cycle starts over.
Might want to hit my knees on this one. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. Yeah. Okay, that's good. How about the New Testament? Would there be a word or phrase that would describe the New Testament?
Jesus redeems us.
Oh, redemption, yeah. Are there redemption stories in the Old Testament?
Yes.
Temporary.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, name a couple of them. Because there's more than one.
Jonah.
Jonah. Nineveh's restored. How about another one?
Well, David,
David.
Whole big time,
Yeah.
David.
how many times? I don't know.
Yeah, I'll say.
David.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah.
How about Joseph?
Yeah.
Isn't that a story of redemption? You meant it for bad, but God made it for good. I'm going to redeem this moment. I'm going to make this so that you survive. Noah.
Yeah.
I'm going to destroy the earth because of its evil, but you will be redeemed.
David.
Daniel.
And Daniel, yeah. The whole idea that you'd be carried off as a nation, the nation destroyed, and still come back and reform that nation is a redemption. So redemption is throughout, but that is the key theme in the New Testament as well. Well, this is how many, if I were to start with an outline, how do I understand this book? It really does divide neatly between these two sections, between a section on judgment and a section on salvation. And if you think about it, what happens in the Old Testament? You can think of all the examples. There are the calf at the foot of Mount Sinai, and the earth swallows up, and or the Levites were told to slash through, to render judgment there. They stay in Egypt because Egypt is not yet ripe for judgment, but when they are, then God intervenes. The new land the same way, the promised land's the same way. There's judgment throughout the Old Testament. God renders judgment throughout the Old Testament. Different times, different people, different events, but throughout there's judgment. And if you just kind of have one sentence that explains the first half of Isaiah, that's what it is. You have lost faith in me. You have disobeyed the covenant. I am a righteous and holy God. I will render judgment. That should scare us into something, but it certainly didn't for the Israeli people. It didn't scare them into a return to the covenant, return to obedience, return to faith. So that's a whole concept we'll explore. And the second half, this is where the Messiah comes in. This is where the promise of redemption comes in. This is where salvation will happen. And for Isaiah, it's pointing to a future time when that will happen. We're past Jesus' first coming. So that time is now. That's where salvation is. It's now. And we will still have an ultimate recreation at the end, but that's where that is now. So it divides really, really nicely into those two pieces. And what's interesting about the book of Isaiah is whether Isaiah the man, the prophet, did he write both sections? Well, some scholars say no, because the themes that are in the second section is the post-exilic themes. What happens when they return from captivity, when they return to Jerusalem. So it can't be the same authors. Maybe it's a disciple or an admirer or someone else that wrote those sections. But either way, whether it's one author or multiple authors, there is a community of faith that preserved these texts. And in every copy we have of Isaiah, the Dead Sea Scrolls from 200 BC, is a complete copy of Isaiah. It's all 66 chapters. So every copy we have of Isaiah is complete, whether it's one man or multiple people. I don't know, but we're gonna assume it's the one man. Well, how does Isaiah outline this book? Or does he? Well, he kind of does. And he talks about the former things in the first 39 chapters and the latter things in the last half. The former things are what's happening now in Isaiah's time frame. We have a kingdom that is disobedient, a kingdom that is unfaithful, that is subject to judgment, that will be judged, and yet there's a promise of these latter things that will come. These things, the stories of redemption, the stories of recreation, the stories of restoration. So Isaiah himself separates the book in this way. And let me give you one verse here kind of as an example. I am the Lord, that is my name. I will not yield my glory to another or my praise to idols. See, the former things have taken place, the present age where judgment happens. And new things I declare, the second half of the book, future looking, promising. And before they spring into being, I announce them to you. It's another key theme of Isaiah. God demonstrates, one, he is sovereign. I am the Lord, that is my name. I am sovereign. I'm in control. I will not yield that to anybody else because I am sovereign. I declare the old things, and they happened, so that you will know when I declare the new things, they will happen. I am sovereign. I announce them to you so that you will know when they happen that I am sovereign. And God, through Isaiah, referenced this idea of he is in control. I will mention one thing here, just about why I did the screen this way. Isaiah is mostly poem, and if you read it in your Bible, you see a nice little column like poetry and not paragraphs like prose. And so I did it so I have the full screen on the left. And I didn't put the verse numbers in when I copied them over because I don't want it to distract from the poetry aspect of it. So that's why when it's Isaiah, it'll just say it on the right with no verse indications on the left side. And when I do, if we read another non-Isaiah piece, I will have the verse numbers on there. But for Isaiah, it's just going to be written that way. Think about think about the older, the things before. We talked about the Sinai covenant and the law, right? And what did God want? He wanted obedience.
Mhm,
Think about what the New Testament brings. Do we talk about obedience? Yes.
mhm.
But what else brings in that's even more important?
Salvation.
Well, salvation, yeah, but we talk about faith. Faith and obedience are kind of two sisters or two sides of a coin. You can't have one without the other. James tells us that, right? Show me your faith without works, and your faith is dead. They go together. But the Old Testament tended to emphasize the obedient piece. The New Testament tends to emphasize faith. We're not saved by works, we're saved by
Grace.
faith. Faith. And here's why faith is important. I announce them to you, and you are assured and certain that they will come to pass. Why? Because I am sovereign. This is one of the elements of where faith comes from. Hebrews 11:1. It's the assurance of things hoped for, the certainty of things not yet seen. Why? Because I have announced them to you. I have told you this will happen. I've told you this is the truth. Do you trust me? Do you believe I can pull that off? Do you think I am sovereign? Do you think I can bring about what I've promised? And yes, we have a God who is faithful, who will do what he says. And so Isaiah very clearly points that out here and elsewhere. Here's another verse. Forget the former things. Don't dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. Again, this emphasis on newness that Isaiah brings. In the tapestry. One of the tapestry things is a way, or this idea of coming from wilderness and wasteland into prosperity, into a highway. It's here, but we'll see it in many other places as well. And there's other verses there in Isaiah to the right that you can look up that have this whole idea of newness. What's interesting about that, I think, is that this is very much as a New Testament understanding of things. Here's a couple verses as an example. If I can click the button, there it is. Therefore, if anyone's in Christ, what? The new creation has come. What? The old has gone. The new is here. This transference of this old way to a new way, the former things to the latter things, the cloud of judgment, right, into this circle of grace that we find ourselves. The old goes away, the new it comes. So Paul talks about that there. Jesus tells this parable. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth to an old garment, for the patch will pull away from the garment, making the tear worse. And it's the same idea. Jesus is not just a reboot of the Sinai covenant. It's not just a reboot of the people of God. No, it's a new thing. And so they don't mix. It's something different. It's something new. It's something better. It's greater than, as Jeff says. Again, he's keeping up with this really well. And it's eternal and it's complete. And that's what we get in Christ. That's why it's the wineskin image there. And then finally, neither circumcision or uncircumcision means anything. What counts, what's important, what the main idea is, it's the new creation. It's this idea of we are not just washed, we are recreated, we are new. And that is what gives us the ability to approach the throne of grace. Here's a couple more that you might want to read. Peter talks about the same idea. So that's another pillar of the faith. John talks about it in Revelation, just one example. And then Paul again in Romans and Ephesians there. Let me just point out, I was just looking up verses that had new, and so I was getting a couple of examples. And I got to reading Ephesians 3:3-13. I thought, this summarizes the entire book of Isaiah in 10 verses. And I thought that might be a better study to do. It'd take less time. But go back and read that little section. Make that your assignment for the week. Just read. It's 10 verses. It's not going to take you 10 minutes to read it. All right, so marking that one. Bottom line, Isaiah is a great book. And so let's quit talking about this and just jump right into the book, okay?
Okay.
Sound like a plan?
Plan.
All right, so Cindy, I'll start with you, of course.
The vision concerning Judah and Jerusalem that Isaiah son of Amoz saw during the reign of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, king of Judah.
Excellent. All right, so now let's,
Got
pull- huh?
You did
So-
good. I hope I don't get any.
All right, so who wrote that verse?
Well, it says Isaiah.
Yeah, I would say Isaiah, right?
I would,
Well, they'll use a vision now.
I would say it's somebody who's taking the writings of Isaiah and putting them together. They're compiling it. They're making an anthology of his writings. He preached for 42 years.
So
He preached more than 66 books. But somebody put them together and put them together in a particular way, and it's given us nice little titles to help us kind of frame it. And we'll see this multiple times in Isaiah, where it doesn't change the meaning of the text. It just gives us a little bit of context. You'll see it in the Psalms. Read the Psalms. There's often a little header that talks about, this is a psalm of David, and maybe a little when he was in the wilderness. Some little context piece that just helps us understand the text.
And my version says, these are the visions that Isaiah blah, blah, blah saw. He saw these visions. So that tells you right there, signals.
Yeah, someone's in third person
Mhm.
saying that he did that. So I lost my place already.
Sorry. I interrupted.
Nope, you're fine. You're fine.
could it be that Isaiah had his own scribe?
It could very well be. It
Mhm.
could very well be a student that's putting
Yeah.
them together for him. But I think when the Old Testament canon was done, which is after the exile, I think they gathered the writings and kind of put them in order. We will read quite a bit in Chronicles. Had anybody read Chronicles before, other than just?
Yeah, I
kind of
read
reading
it,
through it?
remember.
Yeah.
no.
Kings, I always read Kings. I've never read
King,
Chronicles.
yes, Yeah,
But the Chronicles seem almost like a summary of
it's
Kings
a-
and Isaiah and other places.
It's a repeat. A lot of
Yeah.
times it repeats.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's like we're putting together we're putting together the history from all these writings that we have,
Mhm.
and kind of putting it together. And it's after, because it references Isaiah. So it's after Isaiah's time. It's not written during the times of the kings necessarily. Okay, so who is Judah?
Yeah, that's the southern kingdom.
I'm sorry?
That's the southern.
That's the southern
Yeah,
kingdom.
so, yeah.
The
it's-
question is, Isaiah lived during all these kings.
Yeah.
So that's over 100 years.
No. I'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
But I like the way you're thinking. It doesn't make sense in the chart. Chart doesn't make sense in a couple of areas. That's just one of them. Yeah. So Judah was one of the original tribes.
Mhm.
And then the southern kingdom was Judah and Benjamin. They kind of grouped together. The other 10 were the northern kingdom. So he's not writing to the northern kingdom. He's only writing to the southern kingdom. And the time period he gives us is these 4 kings. So Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. Okay, so now let's look at our little kings highlight and go down until you find Uzziah, which is about halfway. It's right where Isaiah is, right to the left of that. And I'm going to kind of explain this chart because there's so much on this one little page. Down the middle, you have a timeline. So it starts at 1000 BC and it's heading towards 0. So at the bottom of the chart, you get 600 BC. So that's the timeline. That's pretty easy to understand. You'll notice that at the top, you have Saul, who was the first king, and then he messed up, and then David, the second king. He had a mixed whatever. He did good until he saw that bath on the roof.
Bathsheba.
Yeah, Bathsheba. Sheba must mean on the roof, I guess. And then you have his son Solomon. Remember what Solomon wanted as a young man? What did he want?
Wisdom.
Wisdom.
Mhm.
And he wanted to be full of wisdom. But at the end of his life, he was so full of himself, he didn't have room for any wisdom. Right? He was so rich, so powerful that he had no concern for anything, and certainly no concern for God. And so God says, because of this, I'm going to take these northern tribes from your scepter, from your reign. And so when his son Rehoboam, which is the first name on the list, that's the son of Solomon, he rules over the southern kingdom, which is the left-hand side of your page. And the northern kingdom was given to Jeroboam, the 10 tribes, and that's on the left-hand side. You'll notice that the colors on the left-hand side change. Why is that? Well, because they killed each other and they usurped the throne and they overthrow each other. And these are different families that happen. So the northern kingdom's a mess all the way through. And you notice that it goes down and it ends right around 722. It's not compressed enough to be 722, and that's why it doesn't always line up. But I didn't want to recreate this chart because I just stole it from somebody.
Does that mean that Israel was gone then?
Yeah, that was when the Assyrian Empire overrode and wiped out the northern kingdom. So that was in the reign of Hoshea. Starts with Jeroboam and ends in Hoshea. The right-hand side of the tribes of Judah, the reign of Judah. This is the line of David. You see, most of those are in the line of David. And most of those are father to son, as you would expect, in a tribe. And then you see a little circle next to each king, red or green. And red indicates
Messed up.
Thumbs down.
messed up pretty bad, and green indicates, thumbs up, thumbs down, right? And then in the middle, the blue are the prophets. So that's sort of the chart in a nutshell. I want to zero in on this section that's in the middle.
Sure.
So Uzziah is also called Azariah. I think that's in the Kings where he's referenced that way. And Isaiah begins right at the very end of his rule. So he's not there for the full 52 years, but he's right at the very end. And then he prophesies through Jotham, through Ahaz, and then into Hezekiah, but not to the end of Hezekiah. So that's where you get his 42 years kind of fit in there. 32 of those are Jotham and Ahaz. And so he's got 10 years on either side, so not a little bit. Most of the prophecy that we will read in that first section is during Ahaz and Hezekiah's time. That's where most of that happens. Okay, I think I've done everything there. Yeah. Okay, so now in one little chart, you know everything there is to know, that I know anyway. Okay, so just looking at the chart, or maybe your memory, what do we know about Uzziah? What do we know about him? Anybody know anything about him? You know something about him, huh? Yeah, from the chart, you know something about him.
Well, he was okay.
He was okay.
Yeah, he was decent.
Yeah, he got an okay.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
You got a thumbs up.
He got an okay. Well, let's just read a couple about these, and Cindy, I think you're up.
No, I read already.
The other
Okay.
Cindy, the son of Cindy, yeah, there's two of you.
Uzziah was 16 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 52 years. His mother's name was,
Jechaliah.
Jechaliah.
Mhm.
She was from Jerusalem, and he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father Amaziah had done. He sought God throughout the days of Zechariah, who instructed him in the fear of God. And as long as he sought the Lord, God gave him success.
Okay, so Dorothy said, yeah, he's okay. Is there anything in that last verse that makes you think, uh-oh,
As long
As long as.
as long as. Well, let's read the next verse and maybe it tells us what happened.
But when Uzziah, but when Uzziah grew in power, his arrogance led to his own destruction. He was unfaithful to the Lord his God, for he entered the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense.
He grew powerful. He was blessed. What happens when we're blessed just a little too much?
Power.
to be out your pants.
Yeah, it becomes us, right?
Yeah.
Look how great I am. Look at what I've accomplished. Look at what I've done. And unfortunately, that's what happened to him. What's the problem with burning incense?
Priests were to do that.
Yeah,
Right.
he wasn't.
He's usurping someone else's role. He thinks he is qualified to go into the temple and burn it. No. That's a priestly role. That's not you. Don't think so highly of yourself. Even though you're powerful, even though you've been blessed. But overall, he was pretty good. Now, you can read about him in 2 Chronicles 26, this one chapter, and then the chapter 2 Kings 15. So you kind of get more of a history if you want to read a little bit more about him. Isaiah only preaches the very end of his life, so there's not a lot of interaction with there, but it sort of sets the scene, and it really kind of sets the scene for the next one, where Isaiah does write a lot. What do we know about Jotham? Well, just from your chart, you know something about Jotham.
He's good.
He's good. I didn't mention this, but Uzziah, after he went into the temple, was cursed with leprosy.
Punishment.
Punishment, judgment. And he was leprous his entire life after that. Now imagine growing up in that household where you saw some elements of faith, but you saw this slippage, you saw this arrogance, you saw this, I can go in the temple and do that, I don't need a priest. And then you see God's reaction to that. What effect does that have on a child?
Mhm.
Well, let's read and we'll find what happened.
Jotham, excuse me, Jotham was 25 years old, did when he became king. Is that what this says?
It's old when he became.
Older to get king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. His mother's name was Josiah, daughter of Zadok, and he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father Uzziah had done. In addition, he did not enter the temple of the Lord, but the people still behaved corruptly.
So he did what was right. He had some experience from his father, and he also had some experience from his father that was negative. And he did not go into the temple. No, I am not going to do that. I'm not going to follow in my father's footsteps. I'm going to be obedient. How are the people doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, the people were not reformed, although he's following,
Yeah.
the people aren't. All right, we'll finish this up here. Done.
So I'm having trouble seeing this. I didn't bring my glasses.
Okay, well, that's okay.
Jotham grew powerful. I don't know what that is.
Because he ordered.
Because he ordered.
Yeah.
Okay. His ways before the Lord his God.
Yeah, so Jotham grew powerful. He was obedient, he was faithful, he did what was right. And he had ordered his ways. He made sure that he was doing what God wanted him to do. Have you ever heard this expression? Hard times create strong men, and strong men create good times, and good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. Have you ever heard that expression?
There's a lot of truth in there.
There's a lot of truth of that, and we're going to see it right here. He's a strong man, strong in faith, strong in obedience, powerful as a nation. Southern Kingdom's rocking and rolling. People aren't doing so hot, but it's got great leadership. It's doing well. What environment will his son when he takes over? What will he have, using that expression? Strong men create good times, and good times create weakness. And that's what we see in our next one, Ahaz. Isaiah writes a lot to Ahaz. So those 7 to 14, that whole section will hit. We know something about Ahaz. We have a red circle there. That means something. And so let's just kind of read what it says here.
Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. And unlike David, his father, he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. Instead, he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel and even made cast images of the Baals.
I something just tickled my ear when I heard you read that. I thought Jotham was his father.
Yeah,
I know,
unlike David, his father.
Why does he go back to David? You're not like your father David on this side. You're like the guys on this side, right? You're doing the ways of the kings of Israel, full of idolatry, full of injustice, full of wrongness, not faithful, not obedient, not true to the covenant. No, you're not like your father, David, in this line, what God intends. And we'll read some more.
Moreover, Ahaz burned incense in one variety of Hinnom and sacrificed his sons in the fire, according to the abominations of the nations that the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. And he sacrificed and burned incense on the high places, on the hills, and under every green tree.
This is just a hint of how bad he was. And 2 Chronicles 28, 2 Kings 16 and 17 will give you some more detail. He's a bad dude. He has completely abandoned Yahweh. He has completely abandoned the covenant on Sinai. He has completely abandoned everything that his heritage would have taught him. Why? Well, we have a whole section on Ahaz, and we'll figure out why. Why he is so faithless, why he is so desperate to go after these other cultures, these other ways to view God. Why is he driven that way?
And why did he sacrifice his sons
Yeah.
in fire?
Right. In order to gain something from the gods, and we'll find out about that a little bit later. But yeah, he's a horrible dude. He's a horrible dude. And then weak times create great men. So what do we know about Hezekiah? Well, Isaiah writes a lot about Hezekiah as well. And Isaiah dies before Hezekiah does. So it's somewhere in his reign. It ends. But the whole big section of the first part of Isaiah is written to or references to things about Hezekiah. And here's just a couple of verses.
Hezekiah was 25 years old when he became king. He reigned in Jerusalem 29 years. His mother's name was Abijah, the daughter of Zechariah, and he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father David had done.
Yeah, we're back into the line. We're not following the kings of Israel. We're back to the line of David, just as his father David had done. So he restores some of that was lost in Ahaz. We'll just finish up with this one.
In the first month of the first year of his reign, Hezekiah opened and repaired the doors of the house of the Lord. Then he brought in the priests and the Levites and gathered them in the square on the east side. Listen to me, O Levites, he said. Consecrate yourselves and concentrate the house of the Lord, the God of your fathers. Remove from the holy place every impurity.
He's a reformer. He's saying, my dad messed it up big time. But I have faith in the God that took us out of Egypt, the God that brought us to Sinai, the God that gave us this covenant, the God that calls us to be his people. So you Levites, you consecrate yourself. We're going to start over here. We're going to rebuild this. We're going to do it the right way. Now, he's a reformer. And he really does restore the fate of the Southern Kingdom. I think you look at this chart, it's not exactly lined up perfectly, but the Northern Kingdom runs out of chances. And the Assyrians come, God judges. The Southern Kingdom, they have a little bit more life in them. Why is that? I think Hezekiah is one of the reasons. Because he says, God's always wanted us to turn and return to him. And I'm going to do that. I am going to lead the nation back to God. And he does. He reforms the priesthood. He reforms the temple worship. He gets it all set up. So, and Isaiah has a lot to say about him. Okay, I'm going to finish there. We'll finish up the history next week. I knew it would take more than 1 week. But one thing I wanted to point out, because we talked about Ahaz and Hezekiah and just how different they are. One of the things in the agenda, if you look at this list, there are several of these that are the tale of two kings, the tale of two judgments, the tale of two servants,
Cities.
and two cities. Isaiah loves this contrast between one thing and another. And it's just laid out with Ahaz and Hezekiah. The differences between the two is so stark. That I think when we get to that section, you're going to say, well, Isaiah is kind of a cool dude to be able to point this out. Proverbs does that all the time. The wise man does this, the fool does that, right? It's that contrast sometimes where we can see truth. Often it's hyperbolic, or the farthest one way and the farthest this way, and somewhere in the middle is truth. We have an election in November. Somewhere in the middle. That's all I'm going to say about that. All right, so that's it for this week.
And I have a question. So on the Northern Kingdom, did any of those kings do anything right?
Yes,
And.
but I'm not
Well, with
prepared to
that-
answer that because I only looked at the Southern Kingdom.
These are references.
Okay, let me just cut this off here real quick. Figure out what else is.
I was gonna ask you, Tim, is that 3 and 5 there, is that out of Isaiah's first chapter?
Or is that Second Chronicles is what he's asking?
Sure you want to stop.